Welcome back. Today I wanted to talk about the concept of why circumstances don't matter. Now, at first, this might seem a bit strange, because there will be times in your life that you might have a dream, a goal, and then you look around yourself and you realize, I don't have the resources to make this happen instantly, or at least in this very moment. So then your circumstances seem to work against you. But what we want to understand is that circumstances always change around. They're never permanent in the sense of you'll never be able to escape them. They will change around maybe slightly, and if they won't change around physically, you can change them around mentally, or at least the way you perceive them, and therefore don't experience them dragging you down as much as they perhaps did before that moment in time. So for me, if I were to look at my circumstances years ago, for example, things didn't look as exciting to me, as hopeful, but I had the dream and I understood unconsciously that as long as I focus on the dream, for some reason I'll be able to change the circumstances in which I am, in which I'm finding myself. And it didn't fail me, it actually works. But so many peculiar things will start happening if you do this unconsciously that you might miss it. You might miss the lesson altogether, which is that a state of mind determines the state of your life. Currently, this world is in a so-called pandemic, and therefore certain activities seem more tricky to act upon. Let's talk about traveling. I know people that want to travel. I could look at myself and I realize, at times I like to travel. Especially during a pandemic time, it's tricky because they have a lot of restrictions, but not entirely necessarily, but there are way more rules in place than there used to be. So then these circumstances seem to kind of work against a goal of traveling. So what are we going to do? Well, one attitude you can have is, this will one day pass, so I'm just going to wait it out. That's true. That is one attitude you could have. Is that attitude going to make you feel happy and joyous in this very moment? That is a good question to ask ourselves. Most often it's not the case, because we realize we have to wait on something that we desire to do. So what are we going to do instead? Well, we're going to use our imagination to travel, to see the good we desire. Because if you go into your imagination, all time and space disappears. You can have instantly the fulfillment of what you want. Now, of course, this depends on how used you are in using that imagination of yours. Because we're grown up with the idea that if I use my imagination, it's childish, it's for children perhaps, it's not being realistic. The thing is, this physical reality, what we call being realistic, has been mostly formed by people that use their imagination. So what I'm getting at is that there's many things right now that we're using and that seems totally illogical and impossible maybe 200 years ago to even possess, that we even have. We have so many things in our world right now that seemed like a pipe dream back in the day. But it happened because people used their imagination to overcome the circumstances in which they are, no matter how long it must take or did take. It can take a certain amount of time physically to make something manifest. But the goal here, the point here is that if I can feel in connection with what I want inwardly already, then all this struggle disappears, all this worry disappears concerning my current circumstances. You reach a point that you can sense, I am so clear about what I want. I can sense joy. I can sense how important it is to me to make this happen. I can sense it's very valuable to make this a reality, that it overrides the circumstances of life. So even though, again, it might not instantly manifest in your world, you will feel different about it. Instead of saying, okay, well, one day I can act on my dream, you learn to realize, well, what can I do right now with my dream? So in the case of travel, one thing you could do is look at videos or pictures of the area or location you want to visit, and as you intensely look at those pictures, you can feel as though you're already there. You start to play a little game inside your mind as if you're already there, as if you're actually looking at those locations with your own eyes, as if you're standing there. Again, this might seem a little silly, but what you're doing is working with circumstances instead of fighting against the circumstances, but you're doing it in such a way that you magnify the dream inside of your consciousness on a deep emotional level. Because the more emotionally you're involved with the dream, the more it compels you to do something about it, to make it happen. That's the thing. It compels you to take actions in different, better ways. And when people are stuck in the circumstances, they usually are so obsessed with how the circumstances are right now that they're not magnifying the dream inside of their consciousness, and therefore they're unable to effectively progress. So they're just going to sort of sit and wait for something to happen. This is a possibility though, but the sitting and waiting is not the most effective approach to me personally. I think there's more joy in realizing that you can achieve a goal by the way you're acting. So circumstances don't matter because you can make the circumstances. There's a famous quote that used to go something like, "Circumstances, hell, I make them." I think they attributed it to Napoleon, that person from France back in the day. That's a pretty interesting way of putting it. Circumstances, hell, I make them. It's like that attitude that you don't care the state of the world. You don't care about it. You're so determined to make your reality the way you see it inside your mind that you're going to do everything in your power to make it so, no matter who or what gets in your way. And that is essentially what we're getting at. But of course, we want to stay at least a little nice about this approach. Otherwise, there might be all sorts of different conflicts arising out of our attitudes. But in our individual lives, we can have that attitude, So in the case of traveling, what you're going to discover is the more intentionally you focus on that, the faster you'll figure out ways on how to make that happen. It's by approaching it from a different angle. All of your dreams, if they don't feel like they're possible, it means that you're not looking at them from the right angle. Now really think about it. If I have a dream and I think it's impossible, it must mean that I'm not looking at it from the right angle. There must be a better approach to this. Otherwise, I wouldn't have the dream. Dreams are God-given. That doesn't always mean that we will realize every single one of them physically speaking, but we are called upon to actually go for them, to actually give it a chance, to give it a shot, to see where it will take us. Now, a mental breakdown, getting in conflict with ourselves, people that get stuck, that feel bad because they're like, I gotta think positive all the time. Circumstances don't matter. I gotta think positive. I am not allowed to feel negative. That's not what we're getting at either. You can feel bad and still succeed. That's the beauty of life. No joke. I mean, perhaps you didn't realize that. There are many students of metaphysics that always think that they're not allowed to think negative. Some people preach that. Always think positive. If you feel negative, let it go as fast as possible. I would suggest the same though, not gonna lie. But I will never say that it is stupid or wrong for you to feel bad, because it's part of life. It's that yin and yang. It's the good and the bad sides of life showing themselves to you. Circumstances can be a bad thing, depending on what sort of circumstances you're facing. But you have a choice here. You can be like, alright, I see what's happening here. I see what I'm facing. Am I going to let this allow my dreams to be buried? Am I going to allow this to feel bad about the situation? Or am I going to use that wonderful mind of mine that I got in order to outgrow it, in order to overcome it? And even if I can't entirely overcome it or outgrow it, in what way could I adjust myself to somehow navigate through these circumstances to still reach what I want, to still reach my destination? I think this is very, very important, because it's part of a sort of paradigm shift, which means a shift in your subconscious habitual way of living. Perhaps this pandemic world is going to change things around to a certain extent that we're not used to. That's why there's so much conflict and chaos in the world right now. People are panicking. They're not used to the situation. So they're in panic mode. They fear that they're going to lose everything. And to a certain extent, at first observation, perhaps that is true. Perhaps we are losing a lot of things. But we have to remember, as we're losing a lot of things, there's also a lot of things to be gained. And I think the biggest issue humanity has is that they've forgotten that the power to actually outgrow circumstance, or to at least learn to navigate this world effectively, lies in their own conscious and subconscious mind. So if I can reprogram my mind in such a way that I realize that circumstances don't matter no matter what is happening, then I'm also able to always navigate my way through any circumstances that are thrown at me by the government. Because currently that's what's happening. This pandemic, the rules are laid upon us through the governments everywhere. So that's not what we expected, or at least assumed would happen necessarily. But what we are in control of is our own mind. So currently they've created a set of circumstances that we may not like. But the way to outgrow these circumstances is to magnify the vision of what we want, of how we want things to be for ourselves individually, so that we can always stay under a compulsion to grow there. So then, even though we have to hold back because of the circumstances in which we find ourselves, we will navigate through them more effectively and ultimately come out on top. It won't bring us down. Temporarily business might be failing, but it doesn't matter. The real business of life is the business of your own mind and how you're using it, because that is ultimately what will help you set up a new business, perhaps in a new sort of reality and form of system. There's been talks about this, but you have to understand, the physical world should not control the inner spiritual world. It is the other way around. The spiritual inner world controls the physical realm. So no matter what the governments would do to us, for example, as long as we control our minds, then none of this can actually disturb us for too long. Maybe temporarily, but not forever. And the longer you stay disturbed about your circumstances, the more harder it will become to achieve anything you desire. This we should never forget. And I thought it would be an interesting and important point to bring home today to you through this channel, in case you haven't thought about this in this manner. Now, I hope 2021 will be a better year for all of us, and maybe it will be, maybe temporary things get even crazier. Who knows what's on the horizon? The only thing I know for myself personally is that I better control my own mind, because then, no matter what life throws at me, I'll just grab it and throw it back at it. Especially if it's something that I do not like, where I'm like, I don't agree with this. This is all symbolic, by the way. Let's not use any anger or negative force to change reality around. Now, if you're new to this channel, consider subscribing to receive inspirational videos on a regular basis. And with that being said, dear viewer, never forget that we are the dreamers.